Hello, I'm Dan Limbach from Pharma Voice, and I'd like to welcome you to today's event entitled Driving Business Performance with Customer Experience Solutions, brought to you by Pharma Voice and sponsored by our good friends at Angel. We have a very nice crowd today. Thank you for investing the time to attend. We'll certainly do our very best to make it worth your while. Now, before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to acquaint you with a few features of our web seminar technology. If you are experiencing problems with the technology, please press the F5 button on your keyboard for PC users or Command R for Mac users, or close your window and relaunch the presentation using the Other Media Player option you saw when you logged in. You can also visit our webcast help guide by clicking on the Help button near the lower left corner of the slide window. Our help desk is also available throughout this event by calling the number on the help page. If you are interested in a copy of the slides from this presentation or have other questions related to the material, please send an email to info@angel.com and put Customer Experience Webinar in the subject line. Your request will be answered in the next couple days. This web seminar is designed to be interactive between you, the audience, and the presenters. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the presentation. Just type your question into the Ask a Question text area in the bottom corner of your screen, then click the Submit button. You may enlarge the slide window at any time by clicking on the Enlarge Slide button located near the lower left corner of the slide window. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You will receive a link to the archive of this webinar in about a week, so you can view it again at your leisure as an on-demand presentation. We will also be sending you an email asking you to complete a brief post-event survey. Please take a moment to complete this survey as it will help Pharma Voice and Angel plan future web events. Now that we're through with the housekeeping details, let's dive into the content. It's going to be an interactive session. As I said before, you'll participate in live polling questions and use a real-time tool for submitting questions for our live Q&A session. You're going to be seeing and hearing a great deal of useful information today, and you don't have to memorize everything during this live event. We will send you a link to the on-demand archive in about a week so you can review the event at your leisure. We have a great panel to help us understand the issues and navigate through the challenges presented in today's environment. Let's learn who our thought leaders are. First, we have Rich Scarbeth, Director, Enterprise and Channel Accounts at Angel. Rich has been working with IVR and contact center solutions for more than 5 years with a focus on bringing new technologies to large enterprises. With specific focuses in the pharmaceutical and financial industries and large contact centers, Rich has proven success in streamlining IVR and contact center processes and saving millions for some of the biggest brands in the world. The desire to build IVR and contact center processes with the caller in mind has been a core component of introducing new technologies such as voice biometrics to the IVR and contact center realms within businesses. We also have Natasha Bagchi. Natasha is a former Pharma executive and now a customer experience consultant. For the past 15 years, Natasha has worked with several pharmaceutical and healthcare companies to deliver customer relationship management solutions to drive customer experience and behavior. In addition to CRM as a tool, she focused clients on the relationship piece where the opportunity to deliver a multi-channel, holistic, and valuable experience was often overlooked. Going beyond the traditional model of customer service and brand silos, Natasha has implemented emerging new technology solutions, ultimately increasing customer satisfaction and reducing operational spend. Over 8 years in top-tier consulting firms and nearly 7 years with Pfizer as the Director of Telechannel Strategy for HCPs and consumers, she has recently started working as an independent consultant, focusing on helping clients deliver the most optimal customer experience holistically across the telephony channel. Rich is going to start things off today. Rich, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time and appreciate everybody for joining today. As he said, it's an interactive session, so I really hope this drives some discussion. The agenda for today is a brief overview of Angel, nothing more than just to familiarize yourself a little bit about Angel if you don't know who we are. Then we're going to jump into the caller-first approach, or the approach that I've seen work best in the market today for design and for implementation, caller-first and how it works in pharmaceutical industry specifically, and some caller-first concepts and ideas. Our company, Angel, is owned by MicroStrategy, which is a large software company, business intelligence software. And a few things that just make what we do a little bit unique is that we come at telecom from a software perspective. In a nutshell, we've built a point-and-click toolkit that allows us to build IVR faster. And we've put the MicroStrategy business intelligence on the back end. And if anybody doesn't know what that means, I didn't either when I joined. But business intelligence is a reporting tool that allows you to sort of cut it to slice and dice, for lack of a better term, all the data that comes through a certain thing and develop your own custom report and try to figure out what's going right, what's going wrong, or whatever your goal is, you can build it with BI. Sorry.
Okay, well, we're going to get the interactive part started right now, and we're going to start with a polling question. And the question is, what is your number one goal with your voice IVR solution in 2011? Is it to increase customer satisfaction, increase call containment, generate more consumer leads, increase channel capabilities? Is it innovation? Or maybe you don't know or don't have a strategy. So we're going to give you a little bit of time to submit your answer. And to submit your answer, just click on one of the circles to the left of the possible responses and click the Submit Answer button. So, Rich, have you seen more success on the consumer side or the healthcare side with IVR?
Years ago, it was all consumer, and the reason being that most pharmaceutical companies, they obviously want a little higher touch on the healthcare side. They want a real human to get to a doctor as fast as possible. But with budgets getting cut and newer technologies, we're seeing a lot more on the healthcare side now, just recently in the last year or two.
Very good. Okay, I think everyone's had enough time to chime in. Let's see what the results are. Okay, well, I see a lot of people don't know or they don't have a strategy yet, and the rest are kind of scattered across the board, except for increasing call containment, which hasn't gotten really any support here in the poll. What do you make of these results, Rich?
Those are tough things to actually choose from, and in general, when we're presenting to a brand or a different group, it could be a post-call survey in the call center or whatever, we'll ask them what their goals are, and this is normal. One person's specific goal is going to be different than someone else's, which was what makes the pharmaceutical world so different and difficult from an IVR perspective. There's always a lot of cooks in the kitchen. Increased caller satisfaction, innovation. I'm surprised to see that high on innovation. I'm surprised and very happy to see that high on innovation. Traditionally, the pharmaceutical industry itself has been slower because of heavily regulated to adopt new innovation, but they've really picked up speed in the last 2 years.
Outstanding. Well, I will close the poll, and you may continue your presentation.
So before we even dive into all the good stuff, let me tell you the one bad thing. People hate IVR, and I do as well. When I first came to Angel years ago, the first thing out of my mouth to the president was, this looks like a phenomenal toolkit. I love all the stuff that you guys do. I hate IVR. And he basically said we're out to change the way people think of it. Most IVR that you've heard or call into, in my opinion, is not good because it's difficult to make changes with, or it's not connected to data. Meaning, if you call into some IVRs, banks are notorious for this, where you'll hear 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, push all those numbers and they're out of order. It's because they had to stack these things on top of each other down through the last 10 years, and it was very difficult for them to stack them in order or to pull out the ones they no longer need. Some other times you'll realize that they'll always add that message, we've changed the order. So they'll always take a second to tell you that they changed the order, like you had memorized their old order before. And none of that is something that should be done or that the consumers want to hear, and yet it is done because it's very difficult to make these changes. And when I was talking about data, a data-driven phone call knows as much about you as the agent that's going to end up with it. It should be connected to that data source and using that on the way through. If I'm calling a travel agency or United Airlines and they know I just ordered a ticket like 30 minutes ago, the first thing out of it should be, I see you just purchased a ticket. Is that what you're talking about? Before it offers me all these other options. And that's a caller first call. Now in the pharmaceutical world, that's a little more difficult to do because you really can't present this big brother image when you're coming from such a heavily regulated area. So caller first in that realm means using what the caller entered to specifically design the rest of the flow. So if I push 1 and somebody else pushes 3 and somebody else pushes 4, none of us should end up at the same sub-menu. We should all have separate individual menus and the IVR should dynamically change on the back end. Or else, why did I push the first number to begin with? But often you will see that to be the case, and in the pharmaceutical world specifically, you will hear menus repeated often because there are so many third-party vendors involved too. So one IVR that's sitting on-prem might get transferred out to a call center that's not on-prem, and that call center could then transfer to a third one that's maybe filling pharmaceuticals. And at the top, you need to take into consideration the caller. So when you're adding these third-party vendors, you can explain to them what the original design looks like and make sure that they know that they're repeating menus on the way down. There is a way to go from IVR to IVR to IVR and still maintain a good call flow. But the most important thing is everyone knows IVR is bad. So how to change it? If you think about the caller first and think about automation, think about the ATM machine. So there are certain things I do at the ATM machine. I do them because they're fast, they're easy, and it's probably more convenient for me than going and waiting in line at the bank. That's how an IVR should be. The self-service in a perfect world. The self-service options that I do in the IVR should be just like the ATM, refilling my prescription or checking a balance, or it's anything that I can do quickly versus waiting on hold or even not on hold, explaining everything to a live agent. Then those pieces should be automated. There are IVR options that people would like to have automated, and a really good solid IVR will allow that percentage of the population to do those things in there without taking a bunch of time away from the other percentage of the population that don't want that. Now that's in a perfect world. In the pharmaceutical world, there are different stages of a drug's life cycle, and there are different budgets and goals that will also come into play, and we'll talk about that a little later. But obviously, everybody doesn't have the funding for 100% live agents. I think we're up to another poll question.
That's right. It's time to hear from the audience again, and we've actually got 2 questions in succession right now. The next one is, how satisfied are you with your current voice applications? Are you very satisfied, somewhat satisfied, not satisfied, or very unsatisfied? So just click on the circle for one of those 4 answers and click the submit button, or submit answer button. And while we're waiting, Rich, have you seen any overarching trends that might affect the decisions companies make regarding IVR?
Yeah, actually there's a couple. And pharmaceutical companies used to be very, very siloed, and I'm seeing a lot more of a global approach. But what that means to the companies themselves is they're having a more global conceptual view before they get down to the brand level or the HCP level. They're being more innovative, and probably the biggest is budgets. There's a lot of budget constraints, things that are going on because of regulation, generic drugs, a lot of mergers and acquisitions that all of them have to deal with, and they didn't used to have to deal with in the 90s. Those budget constraints drive a lot of what the consumers hear on the phone, what the service the doctors get. It's just that it's a very real thing that's driving what kind of technology and what kind of service that they get to offer the customers.
Okay, very good. Time to take a look at the results and see what the audience thinks. Okay, well, people are kind of middle of the road. It looks like a majority are somewhat satisfied, which means there's definitely some room to get to the very satisfied, and thank goodness not too many people are not satisfied with their voice apps. Is this about what you thought you'd see, Rich?
Yeah, and the reason I think we see a lot of somewhat satisfied is the reporting on the back end. When you're looking for a vendor for an IVR or for any automated function, the reporting on the back end is just as important to tell you where the bad spots are as it is to tell you what your good stuff is. So on the back end, I not only want to see how many leads I'm capturing and how much money we're saving, but I need to see where people are failing. And generally, a company will give you a telecom report, and basically it'll show you just the volumes of calls that are coming through and the ones that end up, making it all the way through. And when you can't truly see into each step of the phase and where and why people are falling out, you come up with somewhat satisfied. I'd say that that's very average. That's normal.
Okay, good. Well, the next question is, how satisfied do you think your callers are with your current voice applications? Are they very satisfied, somewhat satisfied, not satisfied, very unsatisfied, or maybe you don't even know what their satisfaction level is? So chime in again with your results, click on your answer, and click the Submit Answer button. And while we're waiting for that, Rich, have you seen IVRs used as a channel for HCPs requesting samples, and how do you validate their requests? Yeah,
that's interesting. Traditionally, obviously, everybody wanted a human being, and in the pharmaceutical world, the ones that they really wanted to get to an agent fast were the doctors. So in this case, it's been innovation and budgets, really, that have driven decisions, but we're actually using IVR where doctors can use their voice for signatures, and a voice signature works just like an e-signature does, so that the admin or the doctor or whomever can place the orders online or however they traditionally do it now, and instead of chasing the doctor around for the signature, they can actually trigger a call and say, call him at 5 o'clock on his way home, and he uses his voice for the signature.
Excellent. Well, let's see what our audience thinks about what their callers think about voice applications. Okay, again, we've got a dominant, somewhat satisfied, some on the very satisfied, and the rest are scattered around. Almost a fifth of the people don't actually know what their caller's satisfaction level is. What do you make of these results, Rich?
It's almost the same thing. It's just the reporting on the back end. It's traditionally IVRs just not had reporting at all on the back end, and if it did, it was just you contained this many, and they were guessing what containment really meant, or I got a full name and address, and the rest of them fell out. But if you don't know why they fell out, then you really can't improve it. And because they're all hardware-based, and you had to go get the IT group or whomever to make changes, things just didn't get changed. And one more thing to this, across the board, any industry, it is very rare that the folks that built the application actually call it, not even once. They work from a Visio diagram, they deploy it, and no one ever calls it. You can go to your own bank and ask them who built the IVR and how many times did they call it during the testing period, and I bet you they didn't call it. It's just an amazing thing. It happens here too, so it's not like we're extra special.
Very interesting.
I call all my client ones, but I can't say the same for an engineer. So we talked a little bit about caller first, but if you do adopt a caller first mentality in everything you do, from the caller experience to what data you get to use to what the reporting is going to look like on the back end to this constantly changing the application based on data that you get, you will always wind up with a better application than you have now. It should not be something that you just stick out there and leave and say, well, it was a pretty good design because we spent 3 months with a bunch of people sitting around a table, because at the end of the day, we've never, ever deployed the perfect application. And the best way to know it is your callers are going to tell you. Your callers will put the pain points into the reporting loud and clear. You will see the 3 pieces that you just not left maybe enough time for them to push a button, or you weren't accepting the word ain't instead of aren't, or they will specifically let you know where they're having an issue. A lot of that has to do with taking into account your target market. an older population for a company like AARP or a drug that's associated with folks over 70 needs to be designed completely differently than one that's targeted for like asthma for children. A good example for that is we had an application that was exact same as a different application to capture names and addresses, but the target market was different. And those folks needed more time to be able, they needed 2 full seconds in between pushing each digit. And they were falling out because you would hear them go beep, big gap. And then all of a sudden my error message would play. I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Well, they just didn't get around to pushing the other number. As soon as we spread out that space and started putting the caller first and the market first, then we had much, much better success. Using data in the IVR itself also allows you to serve your customers better. If I noticed during the reporting that 90% of my callers are, no, that's ridiculous, 65% of my callers are actually hitting 3, then I need to change 3 to 1. I need to service those people the most because I'm annoying them right now by giving them 1 and 2 when they really just want to get to that part. To design an application that uses caller first, you need to bring together all the stakeholders and decision makers. This is, and as an aside note, the pharmaceutical world is probably the most difficult for everyone involved to get together a good call flow. And that's because there are so many people whose job, whose heart, whose livelihood depends on this market, this one target market. All of them know it, from fairly well to extremely well. And so any communication with that market is personal, and it should be personal. The problem with any project when you put an ad agency plus the market brand, the brand manager plus some VP and all, in any capacity, if you put a bunch of people in, it just comes out as a mishmash with not a singular goal. So what we try to do is get everybody in the room, make sure everyone is heard, and that we talk about goals first instead of IVR. Now, if we know what the goals are, lead generation or containment or saving money, or each application is going to have a different ranking for those as well, then we can start to design the IVR and make sure that all the stakeholders know why a certain thing is the way it is. And a lot of times the success or failure of any application, in my opinion, has been the communication. People want to know why you did something, or they want to know you heard their opinion, and they want to know why you said no or yes. And once you get past that and start with goals, you have a really good foundation for a great IVR.
Okay, well, we've got one more polling question here. And the question is, what is your biggest challenge with your current IVR voice solution? Is it slow and difficult to make changes, or it's expensive, or perhaps you have a poor vendor relationship, or maybe you don't have insight, so you don't really know if it's working? And Rich talked about that a little bit earlier, about not even calling it and testing it. So we're going to give you a little moment here to submit your responses. And Rich, tell me what type of security is needed for pharma versus other industries using IVR.
So for pharmaceutical companies actually are more regulated, this is again my opinion, than anything else. We work with banks, we work with healthcare and insurance companies, and the pharmaceutical process of just getting a script approved is amazing. They're the most patient people probably in the world to have to do with all these regulations. But the lengths we go to make sure that we're covered in all HIPAA and encrypting files to decrypting and who gets to decrypt them and where things are stored, it is an extensive process that we never touched before pharmaceuticals became our number one space. Once you're in there, it doesn't get that much easier. You have to follow processes when you're dealing with pharmaceuticals.
Okay, very good. Well, let's see what our audience had to say. Oops, on here, trying to get to the next slide. There we go. Let's push these results out. Okay, well, The leader here is people don't even have an insight, so they don't know if it's working, followed very closely by it's slow and difficult to make changes. The other two, a little bit of poor vendor relationships and pricing is a consideration. What do you make of these results, Rich?
Yeah, that's about what I would have expected. It's the biggest complaint we have ever gotten from a client or a prospect is it's slow and difficult to make changes. The odd thing is on the other side, when you want to change a script quickly, it's normally slow because it's so heavily regulated. But there's a lot of times when a pharmaceutical company needs to add a prompt or change something or an opt-in or an opt-out that's immediate. And they can get that passed through their own regulatory boards internally quickly in such a case. But I've heard horror stories about using hardware and other vendors where they just were out of compliance for a while because somebody couldn't add a prompt. So that is normal. And when you're looking for a vendor, this is so important that there is an ongoing relationship with your vendor, whoever it is. It should be a partnership, and that partnership will be driven by the ability to make changes quickly or easily. And in that capacity, your design becomes better, your overall changes become better, all because you know whatever you put out there now, it's not the end product.
Okay, thank you. Let's move beyond the polls, and I'd like to thank everybody for participating in our polls. We'll also give you a chance to participate in our Q&A, so feel free to submit questions throughout this presentation. You don't have to wait until we get to the Q&A session. All right, Richard, carry on.
I'm just going to do a quick overview and ask Natasha to talk to these a little bit too. But the challenges we've heard from the pharmaceutical company is cost containment and caller satisfaction is probably the biggest. So if budgets are tighter than they normally were, or you're later in the life cycle of a pharmaceutical or whatever, you're faced with this tough challenge of being able to contain these calls as best you can without really annoying the customers. And it is a balancing act. And as your budget gets less and less and less, the containment gets higher and higher, and you know the satisfaction is going to go down. Because in a perfect world, we'd all love to have nothing but a human being on the other end answering the phone. But there are very specific best practices and ways that you learn painfully over years and years to figuring out exactly how to contain a caller in a happy manner, or what the best. And you know, the number one thing is if you have a very good, the flexible toolkit and all that, but reporting on the back end. If you have a good visibility into the health of your IVR, it will tell you whether you're containing happy people or not. And the second one is drive brand loyalty and product efficacy. One thing I've noticed is a lot of folks will throw in technology for technology's sake, you know, thinking it will drive brand loyalty because we're just cool or we're way ahead of the learning curve. And while we have speech, we have multiple speech engines and multiple different technologies, they don't belong in there unless it's out to make the the consumer's life easier. Natasha?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you, Rich. To chime in a little bit more on that, I have a client who said the other day, we want to do some click-to-chat. And I said, okay, well, why are we doing click-to-chat? What is the goal, and what are we trying to do from a marketing perspective for our customer? And there was no answer. There was no real direction. It was just a neat thing that they had heard other companies are considering or launching. So to your point, I think it's really important to, number one, strike the right balance between technology, cool bells and whistles or innovation, as well as call containment and customer service. It's a very fine balance, and really understanding what is happening on the backbone of each of your technologies or each of your channels is going to help drive that success and help drive more of that success within each of your channels, especially within the IVR, where you can diagnose at every prompt what people are doing and specifically where within a prompt they're moving off, hanging up, or trying to zero out.
Yeah, having said that, when you're looking for a vendor, you also want to make sure that they do have all the technology. Should in the future you be able to add it quickly and easily. You want to make sure they have speech, some sort of a name and address capture, which is vital for this industry, some sort of capability for transcription, that kind of thing. But my point was I would not just make all my applications speech just because I think speech is cool, or touch-tone just because I think touch-tone's cool. But if it makes sense in an application, absolutely. Let's go to the business challenge. So the caller first IVR has to take all these things, and I have to say this is the only industry that has to truly see this many little circles around the one big circle and focus on all of them intensely the entire process. There's a brand manager that's missing a couple circles. There's an ad agency. There's an overarching department that's probably customer experience or a call center or whatever it is. There's regulatory and legal. There's the FDA, which should be in the other one, but it deserves its own circle. There's the call center themselves and the customer experience. Each one of these pieces is not only going to drive how we build an IVR, but it will drive how we change it later on. I talked about reporting a little bit and this proactive, constant approach of making things better. The call center agents can generally tell you more about a bad experience and more about things that could be contained in the IVR than anything else. They will tell you the 3 questions that they have to read out the exact same scripted answer no matter who asks it, and that if they could just get those off their plate, they could handle the real calls. Those are the kind of things that whether the IVR reads out or they read it out, it's the same answer. Those are the kind of things that can be contained in the IVR. Natasha? I might have lost her.
Rich, do we want to go ahead and roll into the case study then?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'll wait till you get to the slide. Okay, you want to go to the next one? So as we're rolling into the slide, this particular client started off with a really messy bowl of spaghetti, if you will. If you'll allow the analogy, there was really no consistency in how they approached their IVR because they were functioning as silos, as brand silos. Since there was no consistency there was in how they designed their IVRs, there was also no consistency in the language. There was really no one centralized approach from a company perspective as to how to treat customers or how to talk to their customers within the IVR. In addition to that, with the language consistency lacking, there was also a difference of opinion in regulations and where each of the brands should have legal terminology because each brand had a different legal team. So again, running into the consistency issue or lack thereof. So this really, in this particular case study, we started off with the IVR spaghetti. You've got some that just jump into giving more information to their caller, some that jump into getting the caller to opt in and go through some of that process and the data capture process, some that ask for activation. So in all different orders, some that didn't even ask for some of this information, and it was just all over the place. If we want to jump over to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about what this led to. Each IVR is different. So with no consistency and no one voice for the company, it was all just incredibly disparate. It was a very long lead time to make changes taking 1 to 3 weeks on the good end, and that's if you have everything on, if the client had everything on their end buttoned down and approved and ready to go. The vendor would take 1 to 3 weeks just to make the change on average. There was also no visibility into the health of the IVR. We didn't know how well the IVRs were performing, where people were dropping off, where their pain points were, where they were erroring out more often than not, what FAQs were more frequently listened to as opposed to others, and even the patterns of going from one FAQ to the next FAQ, to try to understand if there was a pattern that would drive people in a certain direction. We really didn't have understanding of the health of the IVR. There was also very minimal reporting. This is also due to not understanding the health of the IVR. It didn't have good reporting to really be able to fully diagnose what was happening and understand the caller behavior and activity. There was also very low call containment. Instead of trying to work within the IVR, callers tend to try to exit the IVR as quickly as they could without even bothering with the expected frustration that they were looking forward to. It was also a very costly system to maintain. You don't get the best pricing this way when you've got several vendors. and also several middlemen. Oftentimes, agencies playing the role of the vendor or account manager that you would find at many of your channel vendors. If you've got an agency playing that role, they're not necessarily going to negotiate the best price for you. So what we did is unify the IVR. So much more cleaner than a bowl of spaghetti. While it tastes good, it doesn't look good and feel good to your caller. And here, having a unified IVR, one voice representing your company, one look and feel, one customer experience that a caller can expect no matter what brand they're calling into, but still having a very brand-specific experience. Obviously, each brand has is there for a specific indication. You don't want to genericize the experience, but having an IVR that's unified, that's consistent, so that you can now drive a very specific brand experience out of it, makes for a much cleaner application to manage. Also allows you to make sure that you've got your I's dotted and your T's crossed, that you're meeting regulation, compliance, that you can leverage reporting that can help you diagnose things better in the background, and that other brands are leveraging the same stuff.
Yeah, that's one of the other trends we never mentioned is that single voice. Even if it's just changing the recordings, it's a trend going across all industries where they just have one voice for all their IVR.
Yep, the trend is going across the industry, and it's all industries, and it's also the trend that we've seen is that you've got the same intro. It's just a brand, or whether it's a credit card or a pharmaceutical brand. It's just the name of the brand is different, but the intro is the same. The feeling is the same when you come into the IVR, and I think that is one of the trends that you're right. One of the trends that we are seeing today. So where are we today with this particular case study? So this client was able to achieve fabulous results as a result of kind of taking the initiative and really trying to pull things together on their end and working with us. So they increased their containment by 100%. They went from 40 to 80. So they completely blew that one, I think, out of the water. Their lead generation, they were able to really get a lot more prospects to raise their hand and identify themselves, and in turn receive information or join a particular program, a brand program, things like that. So they were able to do a lot more from a lead generation perspective and keep the communication going with their customers. And from a cost savings perspective, as you can see from the graph here, the cost savings grew exponentially. Now, when there are major changes or tweaks or reporting implementations, there's sometimes a dip in the cost savings, but it always results in something bigger and better than what you had before.
Yeah, and it goes back to the original point. If you put the caller first, they will let you save money. If you make the IVR good and keep changing it, they will let you contain calls.
Yeah. Absolutely. And if you look down on the bottom of the slide, oh, sorry, Rich, just one real quick second on the other slide. I don't know if you can go back.
Yep.
Okay, so if you look down on the bottom of the slide, you'll see some of the percentages around this. The one that I want to focus on, because we all know, everyone is for cost savings. I think in the end of the day, what we want is, we want to generate more brand awareness. We want more, obviously more prescription for the brand. We want more adherence for the brand on the consumer side. So in the end of the day, if you look at the 80%, if 80% of our callers stopped trying to get into the IVR or into the call center, 80% were actually satisfied with what information they got from the IVR. The IVR delivered their information or was able to process their request quicker and easier, they felt, than going into a call center and possibly waiting in a queue. Here, there's no queue. So
and
I think
in the applications in that particular example, there is a global zero, so they can zero out at any time. So that is true.
Yeah. So this was an amazing number. Rich, I think you're going to take this one, continuously making things better.
Yeah, we talked about it earlier. When you're looking for a vendor, the most important thing is this. They have some method, unless you just have a ton of money, but they have some method of being able to make changes quickly, and that they become your partner. They don't disappear. At the very minimum, they should show up for a quarterly business review or something along those lines. and at the very least, that at least says that they're looking at the reporting along with you, and they can use that same team that came in and was so excited during the dog and pony show, they should be just as excited on making improvements. And if, in my experience, if you treat the client the way you want to be treated, which is making suggestions that makes their life, their callers, their job easier, then you will get paid back. Other applications show up. But it seems to be something that's just not normally done in the IVR or software world as a whole. But you should demand it. And another part is reporting. You have to be able to see where you're good or bad. And hopefully if you can see the bad part and drill down to those bad calls. Traditionally, you've had to listen to a statistically relevant sampling of calls, meaning if you get 40,000 calls a day, you had to listen to like 4,000. That shouldn't be the way it is. The good calls go through fine. You need to be able to drill down right to the bad calls and be able to listen to those. That way you can tune the application faster, you can figure out where your errors are faster, and immediately after you make a change, you should be able to see in the same reporting whether it was a good or bad change. The next slide that I'm slow on turning is this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. You should be able to see in any vendor, you tell them you want to be able to see the data, you want to be able to deliver the data where you want, and you want to be able to see that in a nice neat chart too. Normally what I've found is everybody thinks reporting is cool and they all design reports and everybody's part of it. At the end of the day, though, the engineers and maybe one IVR person at the client site actually do the analysis of the data. Most clients want to be able to see a beautiful visual bar chart that says it's in good shape or it's not in good shape. And if it's not in good shape, there should be a glaring spot where it's not in good shape and it should be actionable. The data that I get should say this is a bad spot and this is where you have to make an improvement, or it's not. But actionable data is the term that I got from pharmaceutical clients specifically that fits so well, and now I use it in just about every presentation. The tuning process overview. So normally, from what I understand, if you have a hardware-based system, and I know this from just 2 vendors, but I am by no means an expert across the board, tuning an application and the grammars in a speech engine is a months-long process. And you have to figure out what is the statistically relevant sampling for that population and listen to all those calls and then group within those calls what the commonalities are of the bad ones and the good ones. And then you go from there. So it is months. If in our case and in any vendor that's got good reporting, you should be able to drill down to just the bad calls, listen through the bad calls. You also listen to some of the good calls too. That's not true, but to be able to drill down to just the bad calls, it helps you immediately. It doesn't take long. Figure out what the issues are. Your callers will have patterns that within 20, 30, 40 calls you will know. Distinctly, and it really isn't listening to thousands anymore. And what it's done is changed the ability to tune an application from months into month. And then within a 1-month time period, you have an analysis and a report and the suggested changes and could have already made the change and seen the results. So it's just the way a hosted environment or software has changed the industry and the way people think about the entire thing. And when the costs are nominal from a hosting perspective, and I'm biased obviously towards hosted providers, and there's plenty of them, the costs are minimal because they have to host the provider has to host everything. You don't have the equipment, the maintenance, and all that stuff. But when you ask them to make a change, it's not really that expensive that you're scared to death that the change might be so-so or not that good, and you end up freezing. So any provider, you should also talk to them not just about the build price, but how much will change as an ongoing tuning cost. If it's too expensive and you don't make the change, then who cares how fast they can go? In this case, we actually tuned an application. We would find the 4 or 5 steps. In this case, there's 5 steps, 5 different pages or steps within an application that's about 120 steps long, meaning There's submenus. It goes to multiple different providers. And in these 5 different areas, somebody was getting a no input or a no match at a high rate, like 20% in some cases, 27%. No input means they didn't push anything. No match means I asked you for 1 through 3 and you gave me an 8. So we drilled down to just those areas, and over the course of 3 weeks, all these numbers went down to single digits. And to go from an error rate, not a hang-up rate, an error rate of the highest, 27%, to an error rate of below 5, and that 5 for a hugely, wildly popular drug, is an amazing thing for a 6-month project. You talk to any call center director about those statistics, and they're floored. I was floored. So if we look at the summary of the results, the containment impact for contained, transferred, and total kind of speak for themselves. But really, in my opinion, the results that were at the end, the customer satisfaction survey. The customer satisfaction or post-call survey after the call center numbers actually went up despite containing more calls. Recapping some of the things we talked about, make sure you use the technologies effectively. We talked about the speech and where to use speech and things like that, but there's reverse lookups and name and address captures and transcription pieces, whether I do it automated or a human transcription. All of them really should be put in design thinking caller first. There are times when reverse lookup would be awesome if they just didn't let me know they were doing it. If they picked up my caller ID and if they got a positive reverse lookup, they said, hey, this is Richard Scarbath, 2304 Caller Road, is that correct? I don't need to know they're looking it up. And if they don't have one, I don't even need to know they were trying to get me one. So they would start into the please name your city, your state, that kind of thing. Understanding the regulations and the workflow. So it's such a specific industry from a market standpoint and from a regulatory standpoint that you have to understand the whole thing when you're building any workflow. And to drive brand awareness, you need to work with the agency and the brand teams to make sure that you are not just matching their messaging but their goals. And if you do take the time and slow down to explain why you're doing things the way you're doing them, only after getting everybody's opinion and everybody's feedback and making sure you're following what they're doing internally, truthfully, my team should be doing nothing more but making whatever their message is phone friendly.
And you know, the other comment I would put to that too, Rich, is that if you're really trying to, if you focus in on that driving brand awareness, you can also start thinking more broadly about some of the other brands and trying to start cross-marketing and do some co-branding or cross-marketing across these different brands, starting to do some sharing of information within the organization as well. You know, email may not be relevant for a particular brand that a caller called into, but it could still be relevant to collect for future marketing purposes or for a different brand program where they are doing email campaigns. So I think that's, you know, something else that you have to think about as well. You know, obviously opt-in has to be taken into consideration with all those things, but, you know, really trying to think more broadly, having that data and then how to use the data in a regulated fashion is the second step to it.
Yeah, people want to know not only why you're making a suggestion, not only what the suggestion is, but why you're making the suggestion, and you need real-world experience. They don't want to hear, I'm guessing. And so that's always wonderful to be able to add that and a little bit more powerful so that we can even set goals for what we expect from a change. What makes a good customer experience partner? And there's some questions actually about inbound and outbound throughout this slide. One of the things would be the technology below. You need to have a platform that does give you almost like a voice portal, inbound and outbound, and maybe click-to-call and SMS messaging, whatever at the end of the day you're using now multiple partners for. Hopefully it just can be one voice portal. Most of the rules that we gave you on the way through the slide deck are apply to both inbound or outbound calls. Outbound has one very specific need in that there's redials that it almost takes an expert to recommend a little different best practices, but otherwise the call flow itself should always follow the caller first mentality. A true partner is not a vendor, They don't disappear. They're thinking about your goals and your win. If they keep your win in mind, then they will win. They need to think about fast deployment times with reduced costs. That is my bias, obviously, towards a hosted environment. But if you've got a vendor that has on-premise equipment that's easy to do and easy to set up and easy to make changes to without being in a huge expense, then by all means stick with that too. There has to be the ability to be easily integrated into whatever the back end looks like. And within a pharmaceutical company, there could be 5 different back-end systems. Salesforce could be using Salesforce. Somebody else could be using Oracle. Somebody else. It needs, with web services and the way what the web's done for us, everybody's system should be easily integrated with the back end. The ability to make real-time updates and changes, we talked about that a little bit. The robust reporting is every bit as important as the design up front. You need to be able to have an ongoing relationship with your partner, and reporting's the one thing that'll tell you and your partner where the screw-ups are. And a seasoned professional services team, make sure that they've built applications for your market. And I don't mean pharmaceutical, I mean just your end consumer and your end needs. Make sure that they've done that, or at least they're thinking through it when they're in the design phase. And then the last slide is actually redefining voice. These are some of the applications that we've done or seen deployed across the board within actually one single pharmaceutical company has all these. Inbound IVR customer satisfaction survey, that's post-call center, automated lead generation, capturing names and addresses on the saving card, screen pops, outbound reminders, click to chat, click to call, outbound SMS messaging. And a lot of times the SMS is a really cool thing to use within an IVR. If somebody hung up in the middle, then send them this, or if they completed a transaction, send them this. Voice biometrics is very, very new to the space itself and being used more for a signature than the actual using your voice for password, which is common with banks. And then there's mobile. Mobile is that last trend where I can say breaks that rule for don't use technology for no reason. In this case, no one really knows what mobile is going to deliver, but everybody's interested in it. And it is a reasonably priced technology that will give you brand awareness, that you can go out with almost no goals other than brand awareness and be fairly successful. It's something that's fairly easy to edit, it's fairly easy to release, and it allows you to reuse some of your IVRs that you have now if it connects to a current IVR, so it's pretty cool. I have no idea whether it's just going to blow everybody away in the pharmaceutical space or not. No one seems to. But we've rolled out a couple apps, and I think for those that are on the leading edge, I think it'll pay off well. That's pretty much all I have. I'm hoping we can open it up to some questions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Rich and Natasha. And throughout this presentation segment of the webinar, we've all heard and seen a lot of great information. The business landscape is constantly changing, and this information will certainly help us stay on top of the key issues in IVR. But we've only scratched the surface on this complex topic, so please make sure you send in your questions if you want to go into greater depth on the issues discussed today. As Rich said, it's now time for our Q&A session, which is always a popular segment of our web seminars. We already have some outstanding questions sent in from our attendees. Please take a moment now to submit your questions. Type your question into the Ask a Question text area in the bottom corner of your screen and click the Submit button. And please note that due to time constraints, we may not be able to respond to all questions submitted in this live format, but we are going to be asking our presenters to come up with some answers in an FAQ document of some of the more popular questions. We'll send that out to you via email when it's done. I'd also like to reiterate that all registered participants will receive an email within about a week to access the archive of this web event as an on-demand presentation. So let's get to the Q&A. Natasha, the first question is for you. Does consolidating your vendor network allow you to leverage better pricing and learnings across brands?
Yes, I think it absolutely does. From a learnings perspective, I think many of the larger pharmaceutical companies and many companies in general, even out of the industry, operate in silos. And bringing those silos together internally is oftentimes hard, but it's sometimes a little bit easier when you've got a vendor partner who can kind of look at things more across the board and take that effort to do so. So there's definitely an opportunity for learnings across brands, what works best, what doesn't, especially when a new brand is jumping into, say, implementing or deploying an IVR for the first time. Taking those learnings and helping them build build a design that is going to be the best and most suitable for their consumers is an opportunity. From a pricing perspective, very simple, volume discounts. You're paying to implement, you're paying for the platform once, you're paying to implement for each brand, but you're leveraging from an operations perspective the volume discounts that you get as calls come in. So it's definitely an opportunity to negotiate that when you look at consolidating your vendor network and trying to bring in that best in class.
Very good. Rich, here's one for you. Can you please give examples of outbound IVR applications?
Yeah, traditionally outbound has always been a reminder kind of thing, but a lot of so prescription reminder, take your medicine, make sure you get your prescription refilled. But a lot of it's been added with the web now, so that I'm actually on the contact section or the frequently asked questions section, and I want to get more information. You could do a click to call, and that's actually an outbound call to your phone and then an outbound call to the call center or another IVR. It's two of them to connect the two of you. There's also the outbound call surveys. So anybody that just activated a card or maybe it's just a list of folks, an outbound survey is a way of finding out more in mass about your callers. And traditionally, an outbound survey kind of thing will get like a 5% response.
Okay, thanks, Rich. Natasha, here's one for you. In the case studies that you were talking about, are the callers typically patients, medical professionals, or someone else?
In the case study that I was referring to, they were typically patients.
Okay. While I have you, Natasha, here's the next question. The iterative improvement process makes sense. However, there must be a balance. At which point do we say that this IVR is good? I imagine most vendors will charge for this iterative approach. What do you think?
Oh, they sure will. But, my perspective is that if a vendor has a holistic implementation, deployment, launch approach, then this will be part of it. And you're absolutely right. There has to be a limit in which you stop the fine-tuning and you just say, you know what, I think we're doing pretty good with the IVR. And it's just a percentage that you agree to with your vendor of choice. But it has to be built into their process. It has to be built into their timelines and into their cost structure that fine-tuning and tuning the application until they meet a certain percentage that both parties agree to, it should be part of that. Anything beyond it will definitely cost you probably out of the traditional cost.
Okay, thank you, Natasha. Rich, in case study N1, did you run a customer satisfaction survey before and after the change in the IVR?
We did. Actually, in every pharmaceutical world that we deal with right now, we have a post-call survey that was implemented before we got there, and we continue it in our case. In this particular one, the changes were actually fairly negligible. So they went up originally, and then we were working on some containment exercises because there were budget constraints. And the result was ours went up about, it was 1/2 to 3/4 of a point, I guess, but it was up. In the beginning, when we first released the IVR, it was up dramatically. And then, obviously, it's a balancing act. But as you're going to contain more and budgets become tighter, we were still very happy that the number was up.
Excellent. Here's one for you, Natasha. Do you know of other companies that have a best-in-class vendor network rather than several vendors in each channel?
Yes, actually I do. And in fact, many of the clients I'm working with today are moving in that direction. Several companies are there. I think more are not there than there, but they are moving in that direction. It takes a leader within each of the channels to really, who understands that channel to really try to figure out what the right balance is from a vendor perspective. But having a best-in-class vendor network across each of your channels is absolutely crucial, again, from a learnings perspective, a pricing perspective, but also, having a leader in that space who really knows how to bring innovation to the table when you are ready for it or when your brands are ready for it.
Okay, very good. Rich, here's one for you. You mentioned that we shouldn't let the technology drive the decision because of something being cool. What makes you think you can decide on touch tone versus speech without knowing our dependencies and goals? Do you feel that one platform is consistently better than another, or at least performs better for the goals that were defined?
That's actually a great point. You can't tell touch tone versus speech unless you know the goals up front. And we've made mistakes. I've made mistakes on both ends where I've added speech too much, or we were going to ask the engineers to add speech throughout, or touch tone solely. And we've learned that where it makes sense for the goals and the audience. So for an older audience, they may not be comfortable with certain technologies that you release. But if you align them with the goals themselves, then it's good to use technology if it makes their life easier. But truthfully, the goals are going to drive that.
Excellent. Okay, Rich, another one for you. If we were looking to move to a hosted solution from our hardware solutions, how do you determine the break-even ROI of on-demand versus customer-owned?
It's almost up to each client, but it's not as difficult as the ROI on many other technologies. In general, the ROI should be, in my opinion, less than a year. We have companies that will say, well, if you can get below 3 years, then that's great. But if you've got the volume, your ROI is going to be less than a quarter. It's pretty significant.
Okay, Natasha, here's one for you. Are IVR reminder programs effective within pharma? We found very little interest here, and more importantly, it doesn't seem to pay out. Do you have some thoughts on how to use outbound IVR reminders effectively?
I think that's a really great question, and I'm quite opinionated in this one. So I would agree. I think that reminder programs don't really generate a whole lot of interest. Sometimes they get to a point where they're more annoying than anything else because getting out of it or opting out of it is troublesome or takes time, or, it's 45 days before you actually opted out of it, even though you've done it on the phone. So I do agree that reminder programs are not for everyone. However, I do think that if you're using technology and you're not going through some painful build process for an IVR, you're using technology that is innovative and can be deployed quickly, it's probably going to be cheap. And if it's cheap, it'll pay out just because it's a service that you're offering to consumers that they could or could not opt into depending on what their preferences are, or at least use for a certain period of time and, maybe taper off over time. So, I think that's the first thing. So waking up in the morning and being reminded to take your medicine, not necessarily something that most people are looking for. Now, being reminded of certain exercises or certain activities or certain things you should think about so that you're adherent on your therapy, that could be different and that could be useful. So I think it really depends on what you're looking for from an outbound perspective to really maximize the benefit. And gauging your customers and asking your caller whether or not the information you provided them is helpful, or even if that really reminder call to take your pill or whatever, if that's helpful, I think gauging the customer and asking them that question regularly is going to be very important so that you can decide whether or not this is something you want to keep going.
Very good. Thank you. Well, we are in bonus time right now, and we want to respect everybody's time for this event, but why don't we take one more question? Rich, is text messaging being used in pharma, and if so, how do users opt in?
Yeah, and that almost runs parallel with the outbound stuff. In my opinion, and especially in the pharmaceutical world, text messaging and outbound phone calls are best left per brand when someone does opt in, not something that you automatically do. And almost each brand usually has their own little, like myangel.com with its tidbits and all that stuff on the web. And when someone goes into there, the most successful programs I've seen have an opt-in in there. Please send me a message. Please remind me of this. Please give me my tips. And when they opt in there, then you really have a really good target market. And the opt-out is just as easy for SMS or outbound. There's always an option within the IVR or within the SMS to opt out as well. But it's not for everyone. You should let the customers tell you who it's for. And within each brand's focus group like that, their online group, if there's an opt-in for it, it's been very successful.
And if I could just chime in for 1 second, I know we're running out of time, Dan, but Rich, to add to that, I think, this goes with the whole multi-channel solutions and approach. I think really trying to figure out how do you balance each of these service offerings and solutions within the channels to try to bring a holistic experience for your customer. And it's hard. Oftentimes, you focus on one versus the other and then it doesn't pay out. So it's really coming up with the right balance. And if you have the right partners at the table who really understand these channels and understand these different solutions within the channels, then they'll help you come up with that and help you figure out what your break-even point needs to be and how you're going to be able to maximize, and even everything from just the approach of an outbound communication or a text SMS communication. How is it going to be maximized? What is the approach that you need to take to be able to cash in on it?
Well, thank you. And that's all the time we have for Q&A today. Once again, I encourage you to contact our presenters. Their email addresses are listed on the Q&A slide, and they truly are interested in hearing from you if you want to discuss more about this topic. If you still want to submit a question to our speakers, or if you want to request a copy of today's slides, once again, send an email to info@angel.com and put Customer Experience Webinar in the subject line. As I said before, Angel is going to create an FAQ doc to address some of the questions that were asked today, and we'll send it out as soon as it's ready. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this event and have taken away some new insights. If any of your colleagues missed this presentation, once again, it will be available as an archive in about a week, and you'll be notified via email. Well, now I'd like to give Richard the opportunity for a closing comment. Richard, any final thoughts?
No. When you're picking an event, well, I guess this is a final thought. When you're choosing a vendor, choose carefully. The world's changed dramatically since hosting and even on-prem. So look for a vendor that can make changes quickly, and a vendor that is your partner. Again, and good point about the iterative stuff. It does end, but you should find somebody that truly cares about your goals for at least a year.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to once again thank our friends from Angel. Our presenters did an outstanding job. At Pharma Voice, we are always looking for better ways to bring you quality events that address your key issues. You can help us with this by filling out the short survey that you will be receiving via email. We also encourage you to look for future web seminars by visiting www.pharmavoice.com. We want to thank you for investing your time today in our web event. If you have any questions resulting from today's webcast, please contact us at info@angel.com with the subject line Customer Experience Webinar. Thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day. The event is now over.